Good day, folks.
Morning, Steve.
Well, obviously give folks a chance to dial in. You can sign in. If you folks wanted to get a jump, we're going to do the reading and then review. So we'll go in order. Good day, folks.
Just you. Hi, Marina. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Give me just a second. I'll get
I just
started.
feel time pressure too. Like I'm being judged by how fast I can read this compared to everybody else. So I want to get ahead. I don't know if you all folks saw the note. I got a couple of conversations after the meeting last time that having the shared context of everybody reading during the meeting really helped, and the meeting did go really smoothly. So we're going to go back to that model, and if it takes longer for the next one, then we'll do that as well.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen. Is everybody able to see the Notary V2?
Oh, no pressure. We're going to read at the pace. This is like a teleprompter. Group reading.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry. I haven't set context.
Everybody know
We
what a teleprompter is?
we we read the doc the last time around. There are comments. There are specific sections that have been updated. My proposal was to basically go through where things have updated. There are major updates, or go through the discussion points from last time, which we couldn't close because of time constraints. I think only for folks who weren't around last time, the doc will be completely new. That's what I propose, and I think I saw the agenda. There are 2 more items that Marina also added. So I was thinking probably use the first 20-25 minutes, I'm hoping, for this item, and then we can cover the other items too. That's my suggestion. What does everyone feel?
So for those of us that read it last time, what changed since then?
I can go through the comments, the specific areas in the specific comments. There are only few sections that got updated. I think it's more there were discussions around fail open versus fail closed. And there was one suggestion from you, Brandon, and there were some questions on the threat model and attack vectors. I think those are the things which we didn't cover. Does that sound fine?
Sounds good to me.
Steve? Marina?
Yeah, works for me.
All right. I'll quickly get through the comments, and I think I aim to, like, once we do this pass, then I'll submit it as a pull request. We can have more debates and conversations on the pull request. I changed the deployer to consumer. That was a suggestion by Steve. There was a suggestion by Marina here. I added that that an attacker can copy an artifact and still distribute it, even though the publisher deleted it. Clarified the fail open, fail close, what those really mean. There's a bit of change here, where I think the last time around, I think the fail open versus fail closed and what we think people would use, I think it was a bit skewed towards fail open. I made this section more balanced. I think this section is probably what needs a quick read. I tried to highlight scenarios where fail open versus fail close both are appropriate, and trying to emphasize that it's a customer choice and not something that the framework should dictate.
So just kind of one little detail there. We mentioned block execution. I don't know if we've gotten to the point that we decide what the right response is to a failing notary scan in every case. I think there might be cases where you want to have a client that just gives you warnings if you fail the notary scan, for like desktop users just need to be able to try things out. And so in the server land, yeah, block execution makes sense, but I'm just thinking an extra step or two down the process here where
Sure.
a fail close might not necessarily mean the same thing to every user.
So what I meant by fail open was the warn and notify, and the fail closed was block execution. And we haven't gotten into how the verification or into the design details of how the verification would work. But at a high level, I think the verification component of Notary framework would just give you an answer, whether the signature verification failed or succeeded, or if it failed, in what manner it failed. And then it's up to the something that evaluates the trust policy, etc., something outside of it that probably decides whether to launch the container or not. Again, that's my high level thinking.
Yeah, it might make more sense just for our context and what we're defining here to say the fail open is a passing scan, a fail close is a failing scan. And leave it at that, and what you do with a pass or a fail of the scan is up to the user after this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think we'll have more clarity when we define how the verification works. I'm hoping everybody just does a quick read of this para and if there are any comments there. Did everyone get a chance to read? Any comments?
Hey, Milind, this is Samir. Just wondering aloud here, will we be able to share the revocation reason as well with the consumer? I'm asking for a use case where somebody revokes it because they have a newer version and the newer version has bug fixes, but not a security vulnerability. Like, is there a use case for people to revoke when there is a newer version available? And if so, does it make sense to bleed a revocation reason if they revoke an artifact?
I think the revocation reason makes sense, like through whatever mechanism that we support revocation, there should be some informational content that like just human readable, not something that you can write logic upon. But I think the bug fix scenario may not fit very cleanly. Like usually revocation is where a publisher says it's unfit for consumption, which is usually on the lines of some security vulnerability. But if somebody is both the publisher and consumer, I think it's totally upon them to when they want to use the revocation controls.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Shall I move on to the next sections? All right. So let's see. So to answer you, Steve, that I just kept the last content to retain the comments, and the paragraph above is the replacement for it, where we are saying there are both. I think the gist of it is that this should be user controlled and not dictated by the framework. And I think Brandon's comment on the failing open configuration, I'll try to answer it further down. I'll highlight that when we get there. We talked about this yesterday. We're not looking into this as a dependency tree yet. It's just artifact as a single thing that is consumed. I think this probably needs a little more discussion around, aside from a revocation mechanism, how do allow lists fit into, given that we have signed artifacts, what additional advantages allow lists give for this specific use case? And I think like another kind of observation I want to make, and probably where we may have gaps in a common understanding, is like looking at Tough and Notary, where some of the examples are related to package managers and dependency trees, like for example, rollback attacks or mix and match. The way containers are being published and consumed as a single artifact, some of them may not apply or apply differently. I think there's a need to define the overall threat model specific to this type of artifact.
I agree, but I think that the rollback attacks for anything signed by a tag, I think still definitely apply, because if a tag points to one thing and then points to another, you need to make sure that you're getting the most current version there.
That does apply.
Yeah, and I think my big concern here was really just that there's kind of a difference between an allow list that lists 100 keys that I trust for anything and saying I trust this specific key for this specific artifact because this is who I expect to trust it. And that just kind of leaves you a lot less open for like when a key is compromised, when something goes wrong, you can make sure that your whole system isn't then vulnerable to arbitrary signatures.
I think you're talking about like segregated roles which control different artifacts.
Yeah, exactly. And with like delegations and a whole hierarchy of keys.
Right. Okay. Again, I think that needs to be discussed a bit more in the trust store and trust policies. Once we get to a fair amount of detail there, I think we aren't, at least the way I've been thinking about it, we haven't married the trust store and trust policy into the repository, or the repository being a source for those documents. We are thinking out of band way of you define the trust store or trust policies in a execution service like Kubernetes or AKS or AWS, EKS. And that gets deployed to the nodes before the execution starts. And like customers basically for their, so a repository may contain a number of artifacts or containers for different purposes published by different authors. And for your specific consumption use cases, you define who are the trusted publishers for those artifacts. So again, I think that it's open for discussion. I'm just spelling out how I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, I think that's similar to how I've been thinking about it. How you need even if the registry isn't that trusted source of that hierarchy, it needs to be a hierarchy so you know which key to use. And so yeah, that totally makes sense.
I think that the bullets right below this one covers it. So Brandon, if you're okay, we could actually probably just resolve this one. I don't know the sequence of when the bullets were added, but
yeah, I added it after your comment here, the first comment that you put in.
okay. So they can just mark. Can you mark those as resolved as the owner, or is the person that
I can. I don't know if you can too, but I'm able to.
I can mark resolve things that I authored, but I couldn't resolve Ralph's sneakernet comment after, which was a joke to my. So.
There's a related question for you, Steve. Like for example, this one, like it's optimized for insert versus updates. Are those kind of performance or operational considerations for a content addressable registry covered in a document somewhere?
In the sense that the insert optimization,
yeah, I mean,
versus update?
yeah, like this is probably just one of the points to consider. There may be others related to how registries work that influence our design.
Yeah, or influence
the
a change that we might need to make to registry. I mean, I think we've all, one of the things we've got queued up post notary would be a metadata store that we'd love to see as part of distribution, but that would be optimized for updates, but we're not even close to that yet.
Okay. And that can be a store for things like snapshot JSON or timestamp JSON kind of things.
The thing is still like rough sketches with lots of different opinions about various. I actually think that'll be one of the more contentious ones. So I don't want to make any dependency on that whatsoever.
Got it.
But I think your point is that all I was trying to say is I think your point is both directions. One, there's what things about a registry or what are things that our registries are optimized for today in its fundamental design.
Right.
We shouldn't necessarily constrain notary to that, whether we will. We do need to do that for most part now. if we find something that we really, really want to add, I mean, it's code, it's a spec, we can change it. It's just that will take some time, so we should be careful what we want to add for the future.
I agree.
Time
Yeah,
expectations.
I think that makes sense. At least for RC1 kind of product that we want to put out, that needs to work with the existing constraints. And you're saying we are open to, based on discussions now, if there are additional requirements that registries need to be extended, we are open to that. To cover this, Brandon, how would we prevent replay of a stale deny list? I think that's a valid point. Like even though it is signed, you have a time period up till the expiry of that signature, which should be lesser than the key expiry itself. You are vulnerable to replay, and I'm not proposing protection to this here, or even with the CRL or OCSP, but it does require techniques like having a snapshot or timestamp metadata, which is continuously re-signed and updated.
I guess my question would be, if we need that timestamp and snapshot, why can't we use the snapshot for the revocation as well? To make sure that the list is consistent.
Sure. So with the deny list and allow list in the repository, I think one place where it doesn't satisfy what we are targeting is the propagation versus. So that is one of the problems that CRL or CSP solve, is the distribution problem is solved, whereas with allow list, deny list, they being defined. So if I'm a publisher, I have a allow list and a deny list. They are in the context of my content as a publisher in my repository. And if I have somebody downstream trying to consume these artifacts, trying to consume a specific artifact from a publisher, from say Docker Hub, publishers to Docker Hub, what do I do with this deny list or allow list? Should I consume the whole allow list, deny list? Does that make sense to me if I'm consuming just a subset? And then I have to reconcile that with my own set of allow list, deny list. And so there are two problems. One is how these allow list, deny list, which are not single artifact, they are a list, they can be consolidated or resolved, and who synchronizes them, which is what I've covered here. Either the registry operators or the consumer, somebody has to set up a synchronization mechanism, which currently doesn't exist. And I think that is a overhead that probably doesn't make sense for both of these parties, the registry operators and the consumers. Does that answer?
A little bit. I worry a little bit about overcomplicating it by having both a set of a trusted root based that's distributing keys, and then a separate trusted root that's used to revoke those keys. And I just worry about one of those things not getting checked and then something slipping through.
So it's all again based on the trust store that you configure and the trust policy that you configure. I think one of the comments that you made was who signs the CRL, so which is usually a level higher than the signing key. At least in PKIs, the signing key doesn't have the capability. So certificates have key usages, like they have attributes that say what functions that they can perform. And signing keys, which are leaf keys, usually can't sign CRLs. Only issuing authorities can sign CRLs. So it's automatically a level above or levels above. And yeah.
So just I'm just still making sure I understand. So the person who would be responsible for creating and updating whatever the CRLs would be the delegating authority, who then delegates to the keys used to sign the information about actual artifacts.
Are you asking this in like how does it work for CRLs and OCSPs?
No, I mean, how
Which is the solution I'm proposing.
okay.
So for CRLs and OCSPs, if you got your signing certificate from a public authority, public issuer like DigiCert, there's a defined process. You actually have to go to DigiCert, go through a process and say this key was compromised or whatever. I want it to be revoked, and they will revoke it. They have a SLA to update, etc. If you're an organizational CA, you have your internal process of how you revoke keys. Same with the OCSP. So there's a defined process, and you as a signer can't sign OCSPs or CRLs by yourself. I think the artifact level revocation, the ARL kind of parallel mechanism that we are proposing for artifact level, I think there again we need to define who can sign it.
Okay. I guess this makes sense. It's just it's offloading kind of the authority to do revocation to existing third-party sorted services instead of maintaining that as part of
Yeah, either third party or if it's as in it is a third party, either a public third party or an internal third party in your organization.
Okay, but then if it's internal, I guess you'd have to maintain that, right? That'd be another thing you have to do.
Yeah, which at least for organizations, they have an internal CA or work with CA if they are in the business of distributing software.
So yeah, this would work, I think, really well for organizations that are also CAs. I just worry about if anyone wanted a private registry that wasn't also a CA already that had all this infrastructure.
I think it's part of the decentralized mode that we're trying to shift towards. And the other feedback that we've got is the large software vendors need this kind of solution, but the individual companies will do something a little more granular for their particular environment.
I think
good.
The range that we are looking for from like simplistic to complex is like just for a developer to try this out or a small team, you can start with even self-signed certificates all the way up to you can get certificates from a public CA, which of course has a cost associated with it. But if there's feedback around how things work in open source communities or small developer base or small shops, I would love to hear that feedback and like if that can be added in comments and how we can address any gaps there. Like we don't expect, like I think in the let me scroll to that section. I think somewhere I do say that we don't expect revocation to be used by everyone, and there's a certain overhead to using this feature, and most likely it is publishers of artifacts which are popularly consumed, or security conscious customers who are more interested in this, and they may have additional overhead to set up the system or get benefits out of the system.
And just to be fair, like the feedback we get, because obviously we've been making calls and getting feedback from the various customers and users, is interestingly enough, the security conscious customers were saying they're going to do this more granularly with the individual artifacts they manage. They're not looking for revocation scenarios. And in fact, it's the larger ones are saying, we don't want to get into revocations. We'll simply manage our deployments by knowing what we want to deploy and not through other policy managers and management systems like their security scanners. So it's not
So-
that we're not doing this, it's just the problem is less for the individual consumers that are managing their environments that need signing. It's more of how do the major software companies and the redistributors like Docker Hub communicate something when the content is intentionally copied out of into other environments.
Yeah, how do we say when it's gone from a self-signed no revocation policy with a little individual developer to being something that's under OCSP? How do we communicate that to the person that's verifying the signature that they know that they need to check this revocation?
I'm hoping that these requirements will help us when we get to the design phase that says the clients will know how to check revocations for the things that are software distributed. In other words, it will, depending on where it's trying to get the content from, it can get this information, but it won't be required for everybody to implement. But the other problem is many of these things are going to be in air-gapped environments, so they won't be able to reach these external sources. So I don't know if we have the best answer, but I think the main thing is the content is moved. So how do we manage that? That update.
I can take a stab at it. So you as a consumer, you don't have a good way of saying you won't be able to trust just anybody who publishes. If it is or put it the other way, if I'm a publisher and I want consumers to trust me, you will have to go to a public CA and get a signing certificate. You could, in limited circles, not get a publicly trusted certificate, but that's more like an informal trust. Like if I'm consuming things from Docker Hub, me as a consumer, I'll check whether this signed image or the identity flows from a publicly trusted certificate, from a publicly trusted CA that I trust.
I think we have two major audiences, though. We've got the audience that is publishing a public artifact out there, the Docker Hubs, the whatever entity is publishing their artifacts out for general public consumption. But I think to Steve's point, there's a lot of people are doing this internally. It's going to be a company saying, we have signed and trusted this thing to deploy on our internal infrastructure. And so I think there's still a large category of people that don't need to have that thing publicly registered. So
that
I think where
sense.
I'm going is that there's going to be a lot of different scenarios. There's going to be some artifacts that are pulled from a public resource into an air-gapped environment. There's going to be developers doing stuff locally on their own infrastructure. There's going to be stuff happening in public. And so with all those different scenarios, I don't think there's just one OCSP server out there that everybody will be talking to in general. There's going to be potentially none at all. There might be one in the air-gapped environment. There might not be. There might just be the thing external and public. And so how do we tweak and configure that to say, when we verify this artifact, we do or don't need to verify it, and what OCSP server to go talk to?
Sure. So again, I think there's something to be spelled out in the trust policy. I've touched upon it here. So consumers can specify alternate CRLs in the trust policy. Consumers can enable, disable revocation checks through trust policy. So I think we'll be discussing all these switches when we get into the trust policy details. But the idea is many of these things do have to be configurable, because like one solution or default will not fit all the customer base.
Yeah. Is there just one out there? I assume there are multiple OCSP.
Yeah. So
providers.
each CA or even major intermediaries, all of them operate CRL endpoints and OCSP endpoints.
So for me, if I was a publisher of a public artifact, is there a way for me to tell consumers, if you're going to check this, you should be checking it at this location? And
yeah,
so how do we make sure that doesn't get?
Sure. So that information is embedded in the certificate itself. So I cover it here. CRL endpoints are discoverable as they're present in the certificate metadata. I think also in this section about discoverability. So it says, so as part of when a CA or an intermediate issues you a certificate, they put the CRL and OCSP information within the certificate itself as signed metadata. So that is one channel. And you as a consumer may, like for example, in the air-gapped environment, if you set up a location where you're able to where you're able to periodically sync CRLs from outside of the air gap, you can configure saying this is an alternate CRL location. Use this instead of what is inherent in the certificate.
Okay, and when the CAs are given that, is that not just for the certificate itself that they gave you, but also for the things you're signing with that certificate?
No, I didn't understand. Can you repeat that?
So the CA is going to give you this organization is trusted to sign, this entire repository of artifacts, and the developer's going to go off with their individual key out there and sign a whole bunch of individual things. So when you get that certificate on your key, that is one certificate that says, okay, I trust this developer, but that's not the signature on everything they've signed, right? So we're doing the revocation on every individual thing they've signed out there. So
Are you talking about the blast radius of the revocation?
I'm just looking at what CAs are expecting us to use this for. And so when we use a public resource out there and we say, okay, we need to revoke this thing, are they expecting us to revoke an individual thing we've signed, or are they expecting us to revoke the entire key?
So you go back to the issuing CA and say, I want to revoke this certificate. And they'll update the CRL and OCSP on their end to say this thing is now revoked from a particular optional time if you provided that.
Okay, but that thing that you've revoked is everything you've signed. It's not an individual artifact.
Yeah, it's either everything you signed or everything you signed from a particular time. If you are able to say this is the time the compromise occurred, which is where CRLs OCSP don't support artifact level fine-grained. And that's where the artifact level revocation list, alternate mechanism, or not alternate, it's a supplement on top of it that comes in.
Okay.
I think my understanding is this is like the nuclear option, right? You're not using this because you included the wrong package in your particular deployment.
Yeah, the artifact level is what publishers will be more interested in. The key one has a much larger blast radius.
It'd be interesting. I don't want to get too derailed because this was a good focus, but what would we do for some of the major exploits that have happened? Like I mentioned the nuclear option. Like, what would you do for SolarWinds? Would you revoke the key or would you revoke the artifact? Like it's, and maybe not to solve here because there's a lot of content we want to get through, but I think it's sometimes to use the designs that we're coming up with, or the requirements and the designs, ultimately the designs, is how would they apply to some of the major incidents that happened?
I mean, I don't have an answer right away. I'll again, we're running short of time. I'll try to cover. I think there were two other points from last time. I just wanted to make it clear that we are saying that the fail open, fail closed is what the customer decides. So I don't think we want to debate there because it's not that the framework takes a default. Does that sound fine? I think we are all right. And the second one was,
I thought we did say we were going to have a default possibly that was more secure.
Yeah, I think we can get into it when we go to trust policies. There are two ways of doing it. We could do a default, which I'll prefer a safe default, which is fail open, or we could keep it required without a default. So customer is forced to set a value. Those are the two options. And I think the other one was feedback from Brandon around the failure, the N expiration and N by 2 window. I thought about it. I think, again, my understanding, I think it doesn't fit because we do the verification only once before we launch the artifact. And there's no, the verification is stateless. There's no repeated verification with a history of what happened on the previous verification. Does that make sense?
I think my my time window approach makes more sense when we start looking at like the tough options to the solution.
Okay.
So that might be just, it's the wrong terminology for what we're looking at right now, but it might make more sense later on.
Okay. I think that was about it. I have responded to most of the comments. I'll take this and submit as a PR, and we can close on other things there. Any high level comments that anybody had? Or does that sound fun? I think the next step is I'll submit this as a PR.
Yeah, the only high level thing, and I hate to ask because I don't want to derail too much, but when we start looking at OCSP and signing keys at a higher level, I think we want to make sure we've covered, and I might have missed where it is covered. When we start getting into delegating keys and we have a key for an organization, they've got a lot of developers, they've got a lot of other stuff going on in there. And I don't think we want to have some central authority approving every single individual developer's keys out there. So I just want to make sure we cover that in whatever we document here.
Is it like how
Requirement
key,
design?
is that like how key issuance or generation will work?
Yeah, it kind of gets into when you're starting to delegate roles out and you have an organization with lots of developers out there. I don't think they want to have, I don't think they want to go back to the CA for every single individual developer they have signed.
Sure. So within an internal, like an organization internal, they can rely on individual developer certificates or team-based certificates. For internal only scenario, there's no need for them to reach out to a public CAs. Organizations we have which have ADs or I think internal websites, I'm not, they'll have some kind of internal CA infrastructure.
Yeah. And so when we start getting into the OCSP and other solutions out there, is just how does that impact any of that design? Something might make sense to include in this.
Okay, I think probably in the verification or, yeah, I think it needs to be covered somewhere. But the bottom line is, at least the way I'm looking at the solution, the notary framework is not doing a key issuance or key generation. There are existing tools and mechanisms and frameworks that people have, products that people have invested in that does that.
Yep.
All right, I took up more time than I planned for. I'll stop here, just submit this as a PR. Thanks.
Well, the first one I have actually is super related. This is the PR I opened a while ago about the same topic of the key revocation stuff. And so here, I'll share my screen, but I think my main question here is how we can combine these efforts to not do any duplicate effort, especially as we PR that other one back to this repo. People can see the screen, right? Good, cool. Never know if these things are working. All right. So yeah, this is just a semi-related discussion about key revocation with some possible strategies. I think there's a lot of overlap, especially in the second and third sections with the other document. I think the biggest differences here are this idea of key expiry, which kind of as discussed here and more generally just doesn't quite solve the problem because it doesn't allow for arbitrary revocation of keys. It just allows them to eventually not be trusted. So I don't know whether or not we need to, it'd probably be nice to keep a discussion of it and why we didn't just do that, but I don't think it's going to be any big difference to the decision that we make. The discussion of revocation lists or trusted keys, deny lists, allow lists, whatever we're calling them, I think is very related to the other discussion. I think we can maybe combine these ideas
Yeah, I agree.
into a single unified thing. I'll give people a second to read if you need it, but it's very similar, I think, to the other one.
Did the timestampings, because to me, when I was, because these have evolved a lot over time, reading some of these and then reading the new stuff, now that I understand more the timestamping authority, the TSA stuff, did this get covered? Like, I guess the question would be, what in here didn't we cover in the other doc? Not that, because I think this doc fed into how that other one was created. So other than Git history.
The biggest difference here is this option, which isn't included in the other document, which is combining the explicit revocation in this doc in the key revocation with the key distribution and delegation strategy. You can do that all using a single mechanism instead of needing an external, a second mechanism for revocation. So this strategy here is the big different one.
So I skimmed through it. I need to do a second detailed pass, but I agree with some of the things. The address key expiry, I didn't consider it because it didn't have the explicit revocation support.
Yeah,
the allow list, deny lists are very similar. There can be some points which can be combined. The combining of explicit, that is allow list, and implicit, that is key revocation, I think that requires some more thought. I think the parts that are not addressed is how does distribution occur, especially in a multi-registry. I think that's where I'm stuck at that approach.
Yeah, I think that as you kind of discussed in your document as well, we're kind of at the point where we're going to need some kind of third-party service in order to make sure that some information is synced between registries. So if information needs to be synced and needs to be updated consistently, that'll need to happen somewhere else. And so that's kind of where I see this fitting, is that, well, the mechanism is pretty straightforward. If you have a party that delegates to another party and you have a sense of timeliness for that delegation, if you can just replace the delegation with the new one, and that'll essentially revoke the previous key that's used. So that kind of combines that idea of distribution and delegation with the idea of revocation.
I think where there are I think with the trust distribution, the delegation and trust distribution, I think we still have to make a stance on whether that will be stored within the registry or not. Because some of these are metadata type objects, or even like repository level metadata type objects, which are currently not supported, but may be supported in the future. And for like, I touched upon this before, like, we think maybe the trust stores will be configured through out-of-band mechanisms rather than stored within the registry itself, at least for now. But again, both with the trust delegation and the allow list or deny list, how it gets propagated and where it will be stored, I think if we can be explicit on that, then we can debate more on it.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because like you were saying, there's probably a need to have these trust stores be external anyway if they can be used by different people. So this is just taking advantage of that and trying to simplify so you don't have two external servers you have to talk to, by just having one that does both the delegation, key management, as well as the revocation. I feel like is just a much simpler, especially for these air-gapped environments where they'll need to sync this information once. If it's just one thing they have to sync, it's more likely that that'll it'll be within a workflow that's possible.
So with this, I'm thinking two directions here. Sorry, Steve, saw you getting ready to jump in. One direction I'm thinking is that we probably just want to approve this, get this in the repo, and then do a PR on top of this file with stuff like those CSP and other stuff that we've been working on to try to extend this. Does that make sense, Steve, to get this approved and move forward so that we can iterate on top of this?
I guess I defer to Melinda and Niaz on like, how do you want to reconcile the two? Because there, to Marina's
think,
point, there is a lot of overlap. So
I can make a pass through, and again, my suggestion, I can make a pass through and put in questions. Because I think that there are some assumptions here regarding where these things will be stored. And if we assume that these will be stored in the repository, then it needs to answer how it will be discovered and how it will be distributed. I think that's where I see gaps.
Yeah, and I think that maybe like you have that section in your document about kind of why we can't do revocation within the registry as they are today, because of the sense of replacement and updating being a problem. And I think that totally applies here as well. So maybe that's one place where we can kind of combine efforts and kind of explain that well.
I did want to touch on something that Miranda said earlier. Was like I don't want to lose. Like, there's been a lot of great discussions, and closing issues and PRs kind of loses that. I know we've had some debates around our discussions, good or not, but the discussion feature of GitHub, I'd love to capture any of these things. Like, there's been a couple of these things we've had to revisit in various places where I'm going back and finding closed PRs where the feedback was. So if you want to, and unfortunately you can't take a PR and just convert it. You can convert an issue, but you can't convert a PR. So if you wanted to lift this, Marina, and put it into a discussion, pieces of it that we think are, the relevant pieces, that'd be awesome. And then the other pieces that you, Melinda, and Niaz want to merge in the key revocation doc would be awesome.
Yeah, I think maybe we can do a little of both. Maybe we can merge the actual content and then move some of the discussion into a GitHub discussion. Because I think that way we maintain, this is our current set of ideas that we're thinking about, as well as this is what we're actively talking about and where this came from. So someone could find both of those things.
I think just
Okay, so
asking.
you and Melinda will work on the content that will get merged, because I think they're both. Like, I've lost track. I think Brandon kind of said the same thing at the top of it on the heading, like which PR is this associated with. So if I'll just leave it to you guys to figure out how you want to unify the PR.
Okay, yeah, because this one's already in GitHub all set up to be merged. So I would say we can do this and then PR on top of it. And
Yeah, I think my suggestion would be, I haven't reviewed this properly. If I can review and just put in some questions, and if you can respond, then at least I know the areas where there are either gaps or if you have answers, you may update them. And I think that'll get to a better place where I can merge on top. Because there are some disconnects, and it'll be difficult for me to merge with those disconnects.
Okay, yeah. So I'll take one more pass at it. Yeah, feel free to add the questions. I'll take another pass at it sometime this week, and then maybe we can get this merged before next Friday.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I definitely push to try to get this merged rather than pulled out to a discussion or something else. We've got the content here ready to go. So whatever you combine and make work there sounds good. I think I can also
open a discussion on this topic so that we can keep talking. I think that's also a good idea. But yeah.
I also want to throw out, because we were talking about some of this stuff potentially can't be done in a registry. And so I'm thinking about the scenarios when we start copying artifacts around, if someone doesn't have that infrastructure on their side for the revocation, for whatever else we're going to put into this external system, to figure out what a graceful degradation looks like so that we get some value out of this. And, maybe you don't get the revocation, but you at least get that, hey, this thing was at least at some point signed, so you can do something with it. So just thinking through that process and how we might want to document that.
Yeah, we've been spending a lot of time on the ability to move content between registries as part of the secure supply chain model. So it's, making sure that a consumer has the content they depend on, and they're not dependent on public external sources for their production workloads, but they have the ability to bring in that information when it makes sense and how it makes sense. So it is a gnarly one. I struggle on how much is product specific versus industry specific. We've been trying to do a syndication spec since we created MCR. There is some, I don't want to it's outside of Microsoft. There is some effort starting there. So I think there needs to be more focus on that. I think for this year, it'll probably be more of here's guidance. And then hopefully as this makes more sense and we've enabled the ability for content to move from the underlying signatures, we could then start working on industry tooling or industry specs and guidance on how should you move things. It's not to this, I think what we're talking about here, it's not just the content, it's, hey, is the content still viable? What is the, kind of thing? There was, I even put a comment there around tombstones, like just deleting content on something public doesn't mean a consumer effectively knows that content was deleted or even the signature. So I think getting these pieces in place will enable a lot of the workflows, and then we need to come back and say, all right, now that these pieces are capable, what is the prescriptive guidance? What are the specs? And hopefully eventually what is the tooling to make this stuff just pointy clicky easy? Because nobody wants to write all this stuff. Just make it work. We have just 5 minutes or 4 minutes left now. I did want to call out because Daniel's still here. And he's been working on the OPA gatekeeper validation stuff. Daniel, you want to take a minute and just talk about that? And just anybody wants to take a look, like all the discussions we've been having would be great for Daniel to think about how do we incorporate this in the validations.
Real fast before we do that, I just had the one other issue I had. I don't think we need to go over it now. Just a quick ask that people maybe take a look sometime this week so we can try and get that one merged as well. I'm just trying to help close out these issues so we can move forward on implementation. But yeah, I'd love to hear about the OPA stuff as well.
Yeah, sorry, Marina. I was leaving that between you and Niaz and Brandon and Malin to figure out how do you converge. I don't want to just say merge. How do you converge the content? And if there's a history, Git history that you guys want to maintain, that's fine. I just want to be careful that we don't wind up with two duplicate. That one document alone goes into so much stuff. It sometimes gets confusing on what's a discussion leading up to a recommendation versus a recommendation. So we can figure out how to do that.
I think Marina was mentioning 66 as a different PR that she wanted us to look at.
Which one's 66?
That was just the other one I had on the agenda, but we don't have time, but
oh yeah, sorry.
It doesn't need to be an in-person thing. Yeah, that was just my quick note.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I did look at that and I was like, I just completely disconnect. There's no way we're going to get through that in this. And I was trying to give Daniel a minute or two just for all the work that he just recently did in the validation to make a call out for reviews. So yeah, we should pick that up next week if we could. Marina, can we just move that to next week's conversation? And people please look at it beforehand. Daniel?
Okay. Hi, nice to meet you all. I think it's the first meeting I actually could attend. So not exactly sure about the expectation right here, but what I did was just write basically a short OPA rule to actually go to the registry, pull the signature, and verify against a certificate, which is currently hard-coded in the Rego rules. Yeah, that's more or less basically what the rules currently do. But Steve also mentioned already that the previous conversation might be interesting for that, but I think there will be a requirements file somewhere then, and we can look if we can get this into Rego or not, and well, we'll see.
So the reviews out there, Marco put some comments in there. Oh, by the way, there was a discussion around possibly moving this meeting again because Marco and some others haven't been able to make it. So I can't remember whose doodle we wound up using last time, but I asked Marina whether that was yours or Marco's or whatever, but if we can revive that one, we want to look at possibly moving this to a different time so others can attend.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I can do another one. Maybe I'll try and include more times or something. There just doesn't seem to be a good time. I think that was what the
There's
the
no
real
great
conclusion
time.
was.
And I think what happened was we purely looked at the quantity of people that approved a particular time. I think we just need to be a little bit more of who's the ones that have been more, trying to be more engaged, so that we can make sure that we put some weighting to the folks that have been trying to be more engaged.
Yeah, look for the key stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. That's on the hour. I won't even try to say what time it is because we're trying to be time zone sensitive to everybody. So everybody have a great weekend, because I think that's still ahead of everybody. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.